Greetings. Just a quick thought. Stopped in for just a little refreshment. Was thinking about this. There have been many expressions used before at times in history that conveyed information. Hands across the water was an expression that was used and an act that was engaged in at a pub. With the water be put in the center of the table or at a table, and they would reach across the water, the glass, the mug, and shake hands. If you took that was somewhat symbolic. Of course, I'm not particularly knowledgeable about this, but I remember learning of this probably in high school, that was the symbol and the way of Scottish nationalists connecting with French against the English, to know that they were actually allies, that this person was an ally. They knew what that code meant. So obviously I don't know exactly how that went, but hands across the water, from what I understood, came from that. Friend of a friend. Sounds like a good statement. Runaway slaves would use that expression to check to see if the person responding had the proper response. The proper response, as far as I remember, was friend of a friend, to repeat it. But it was an expression that was used by people who were running, escaping, to find people who were trying to help them, ready to help them. They all were at risk. They had to know who their enemies were. Not all white people were the enemy, but these black people had been enslaved. And yet they couldn't get there, almost without question, they could not get there, particularly get to Canada, out of the United States, without help. Friend of a friend was code. They used it. Those who didn't know what it meant and might respond differently. They'd be leery. Didn't prove anything, but it did help establish. During World War II, American GIs sentries particularly, would shout out or talk to whoever was coming to say, where are you from? And for many Americans, the answer was Walla Walla, Washington. And why was Walla Walla, Washington the response? Because Germans could not say Walla Walla, Washington, or Walla. They couldn't get their mouths around that, because if they were native German speakers, their mouths wouldn't work that way to say that quickly. The way a native English speaker, but certainly an American, would say Walla Walla, Washington. I don't have to struggle with it. A Canadian wouldn't have to struggle with it. A Brit probably would not have to struggle with it. Walla Walla, Washington, because we say W's and we say our L's like that. A German would not be able to do that. What's our code today? There are many, or there should be, but let's develop a couple. Here's a thought. What's a woman? That's a code. That's a question. That's a secret code. And if the person answering or person you ask the question to answers with anything other than the answer, what a woman is, and starts giving you gender and multiple and fluid, and they give you all of this, and men can have women babies, men can get pregnant. If they give you any of that stuff, you congratulations, you just discovered who the enemy is. You do realize that's the stage we're at. We are at the stage where we have to identify who the enemy is. The enemy is amongst us. The enemy can't define what a woman is. That's the enemy. Because those people think it is okay, think it is not only okay, but they should support transitioning children. You can't just let girls play sports. You have to change the girl into a boy. You can't just let a boy play with dolls or like fashion and design and be in theater. You can't just let the boys do that. They have to become girls. The enemy is amongst us, and they're after the children. And ultimately, in a whole different sense, they're after the destruction of our society and our values. What is a woman? I can ask that question of anybody. And I can tell you by your answer if you're a friend, or if you're a reasonable person, or if you are the enemy. Start thinking of other questions. Start thinking of other coded questions that we can use to root out, to show who is the enemy. It's going to take a while, but what does BLM stand for? If the response is something other than burn, loot, and mayhem, if the response is something other than Jericho Green's expression of some Black Lives Matter, always got to have that S, some in front of it though. If the response is something other than that, or even in the sense of it should mean that Black Lives Matter, what it was co-opted into was give money to Marxist grifters who will take the money from the Black community, from Black people. If your responder doesn't give any one of those types of responses, but says Black Lives Matter, raise their fist, they're the enemy. Recognize them as such. Come up with some more. Let's talk. Let's create this. Let's develop it, and let's pass it along. This was a live stream because I wanted it out immediately. Hope some people will tune it in, and we can start some of these conversations that we need to have because we are woefully unprepared. See you next time. Son of Liberty 2020, mliberty2020@gmail.com, thelibertyhub.com. Like, comment, share, subscribe, pass it along.